Hey friends, I wanted to come on here for a few minutes, and Jonah's definitely going to probably interrupt a bunch of times, maybe even Zane. But I wanted to talk about there's this one parable.
Hi.
I think it's in
Um,
most of the Gospels.
My name is Jonah, and I'm the kind to game. All the kind of game.
You love to play games, all different kinds of games. Okay, why don't you go in the other room for a minute, okay? Anyway, so there's this parable in the Bible. It's in each of those Gospels. It's not even a parable, I'm sorry, it's a story. And it's about Jesus feeding a huge crowd of people with a very small amount of food. The numbers are 5,000 people are fed with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And this story has always been read and taught as like something where a supernatural miracle occurred because God was so wanting all the people to be there to listen to Jesus, or that God is always going to provide, and things like that. That if nothing else, there'll be a supernatural miracle. But as I've been active with the protests and things like that, I was thinking about this story, and I know that the way that things happen in the Bible and everything, and storytelling, the way we recount history has also changed. And so sometimes we tell narratives for a certain reason. And miracles they weren't like odd. There were people who worked miracles all the time in the ancient world. The weird thing was for Jesus to do healings and miracles for free, because this was a money-making endeavor for many, many people. So when you have stories about miracles, it's not that they're not true, but just you got to understand that there's like a specific story and things that are happening and a way of telling stories to create a narrative or for a purpose. So it got me thinking about the different things with Portland and the protests, and a lot of us who have been out there and have some sort of faith have been out there and compelled because of our faith, and yet we keep getting the pushback that we're rebelling. But there's so much happening where it's like you get on the streets and I don't have to know anything about you to recognize that great spirit of love or Christ or God, no matter what someone's background is. Like, I can't really explain to you, and I think a lot of people who are in the groups that I'm in would be able to say or confirm this, but like, there are definitely times where heaven is brought to earth, and those times are in moments of like mutual aid where there's a need that's met and the community doesn't ask questions, they just rise and meet it, and they surround that person with love and community. And it's kind of hard to explain because it seems like, okay, cool, some people help some people out, but when you're that person that's in need, and then also you're someone who can uniquely meet a need for another person, like there's something that just happens, and it's very powerful. And so a lot of us have been thinking differently about mutual aid and like kind of it bringing the kingdom and it being the whole point of the gospel. So it got me thinking more about stories like Jesus feeding the 5,000. There's a couple different versions with slightly different details. Sometimes they mention the little boy that brings the fish to Jesus and offers them, and then sometimes they don't. But what if that story was really a story about mutual aid? The crowds had been gathered there to listen to Jesus, but also John the Baptist had just been beheaded. Jesus was actually in mourning when this all happened. And the crowds were grieving, most likely, and in need of comfort. And Jesus saw that anyway. And when they had been out there with the crowds for a while, the disciples also were like, hey, it's getting late. You're hungry. You need rest. Like, let's send the crowds home and let's go. Like, let's do this. And Jesus is like, no. Like, he was moved to compassion for the people and the crowds. And he's like, no, I don't want to go anywhere. We have enough. And then they started dividing the things that they already had And there was not only enough, there was more than enough. There was 12 bushels extra. What if that wasn't a story about a miracle happening as far as like zapping food that didn't exist into place? What if the miracle or the thing was that everybody's hearts were moved to realize that there's enough and that we can share and that we're going to be provided for? You know, not necessarily with miracles, but because humans are pro-social, and because we are made in the image of God, we can recognize that. And so I really do think that like some of these parables that we've been told to understand a specific way, and part of the point of parables and stories and things like that from the ancient world also was to have, you know, multiple lessons could be drawn from them. But I really think that maybe it's time to stop thinking so much about, you know, some eternal heaven or some eternal hell that we're either saving people from or sending people to, you know? Maybe it's time to start thinking about heaven and hell being places and times and periods in our lives right now that the gospel, which is feeding the hungry, giving water to thirsty people, you know, clean water. How you doing, Flint, Michigan? How you doing? Visiting those in prison, or, you know, abolishing the prison system altogether. All of those things, those are the gospel, and those are the things that set people free. And that's what brings heaven to earth right now. And maybe that was always the point. And to be honest, like, it's a little scary sometimes to let go of the idea of some sort of bigger eternal goal. You know, maybe it's not like some sort of finished product is ever going to happen as far as like, oh, everything's going to be perfect. But maybe there's moments and things like that that happen, and we can build on those and truly work on bringing heaven and the kingdom of God, or the gospel, or healing, or the great love, however you kind of think of that. Maybe it's about here and now and not so much about the future. So anyway, a couple thoughts on a Sunday morning.